So we'll talk about our movie. And our movie, like I said this week, is The Highwaymen. Now, first thing I know about The Highwaymen is that it's on Netflix and you can watch it. It came out a couple years ago. I can't believe how long ago it came out. I remember it like it was yesterday, but it came out in 2019 and I never got around to. I guess it's as good a time as any to watch it and talk about it too. There's a lot of similarities with this to like what I'm writing now in terms of like tone and genre. Not so much not in terms of storyline, but like in terms of tone and genre. It's playing with a lot of the ideas of tone that I want to play with in mind. And it's like this idea of merging gangsterism and western, like gangster and western styles. That's kind of what this does, right? And the 1930s, um, that's an era of of when like I think this was the 30s, right? I don't actually know if this might have been was this the 20s? 20s, 30s, whatever. We were transitioning out of like the old Wild West kind of days and into the more modernism, gangsterism, right? So that was something I liked about this that it played with. Um, there was a great line by Woody Harrelson where he's like, after he beats up a guy, Clyde may be king, but I'm a Texas Ranger. Interestingly enough, this film has the kind of outlaw gangster genre merging I like. Um, yeah, so 1930s, a time of organized crime, right? That was when the fucking mafia really formed, too, in the 30s. Um, but also a time when outlaw gangs were still a thing, but dying out. So I guess Bonnie and Clyde and the Barrow Gang were the most famous, like, of a dying breed. Like, they were the last of, like, that outlaw, shoot 'em up kind of gang, you know? And I don't want to say John Dillinger's gang was like that because it wasn't. It was more like a gangster gang. It was more organized. There was bank robbery, right? This was just straight murder for the most part. This idea of putting gunfighters on the job of taking down um, outlaw gangs in like a more modern era was the most interesting part about this for me. Okay. Right off the bat, the inciting action, meeting Frank, played by Kevin Costner, presenting him with his mission, an old school Western style Texas Ranger, right, a gunfighter whose career has passed, coming out of retirement for the biggest hunt of his life. What's more fun is, of course, the fact that it's true, a true story about extraordinary events. So I always liked stories like this, right? There's immediately a story when it's true. Frank is also the typical hero, refusing his call to action at first, right? And he's refusing it out of a promise he made to his wife. But the gunfighter within him wants to break loose again, right? It naturally can't help but pursue this. Old habits die hard. I like Hancock's films too. In general, I do like John Lee Hancock's films. I mean, the most recent one I watched was The Little Things. I talked about it a couple weeks ago. He did that. But he's also done kind of more obscure little stories, things about times or eras or events, but the things you don't think of. I mean, he did The Blind Side, right? That's like its own little story within a bigger, theme of and genre of football, sport, sports story. But like, I mean, he's done, and this too. Like, this is about the guys who took down Bonnie and Clyde instead of just being about Bonnie and Clyde. I like Hancock's films. Meant to, yeah. So I did. I mean, I meant to watch this in 2019. So I'm glad I got to it now. I like how there's a similar kind of feel to Unforgiven too. Um, a retired gunslinger who's lost a pep in his step, not the same man he was. That scene with him shooting the bottles is literally like taken straight from that movie, like from the Eastwood classic Unforgiven. Like, it reminded me exactly of when he's practicing his shooting after not doing it for so many years. And what's funny was I knew this movie would have these kind of vibes before I even watched it. Um, it's my sixth sense about movies, I guess, because I made the fun fact of this week about Unforgiven. So when we get to that in a second, and I didn't, I just ended up having similarities. Um, I also I like how there's an emphasis on location. I think it's important for the plot too. This outlaw Wild West feel we want from the film is most emphasized in the southern western places Frank and Manny go. So there are there are many scenic shots that I think help this get across that mixed genre. My kind of story um, is one like this with like ex Texas Rangers going after gangsters. It's not something you normally see in a crime movie. Um, it's either a western or it's a gangster film. I like when those are merged. I feel like I've said that a lot. We can move on from that point, right? Uh, my problem, of course, is the one-dimensionality of Bonnie and Clyde themselves in this movie. That was kind of tough. They're antagonists, but they're also understandable. There's a relatability, I'm sure, to them that they don't touch on, I think, enough. They do try, but not enough. It would have given them more of a purpose in the story, I think, overall. A stronger purpose. Instead of just making them the bad guys that our good guys hunt. Because the story of Bonnie and Clyde was of divisiveness. It divided people. Because they were famous. Like, they were, like... Natural Born Killers, the Tarantino written Oliver Stone film, that was totally based on the story of Bonnie and Clyde because it had those similar ideas in it, that they became famous, Mickey and Mallory, and that's what it's based on. Bonnie and Clyde, in reality, in true life, that was what happened. People loved them, their story, like they were famous, like people idolized them for some reason, but all they were doing, they were cold-hearted murderers. They were murdering people. I get it, though. Who doesn't know about Bonnie and Clyde? Who doesn't know that story? It's the story about the guys who took them down, Frank and Manny. We don't know about that one. So they are the focus. We spend the most time with them, and for good reason. But I think playing with the divisiveness of Bonnie and Clyde would have, in my opinion, made it even more impactful as a whole. Instead, they are more of a mysterious, terrifying presence. They basically are presented as monsters that are being hunted by our good guys, and that comes across. When we do see them, it's pretty, it's gruesome the way that they kill people, the way that, it was terrifying. But because the film does go back and forth a little bit, it didn't flesh out their relatability. It didn't flesh out the divisiveness enough of them, really trying to make them... They were kind of one-dimensional. We were talking about one-dimensional villains. That's kind of what they were, but they could have been more. I think them trying to play with it, too, didn't help. It only made it worse, because we don't actually spend legitimate time. The film is not in their perspective at all. And when it is, it's very brief. It's for 2 seconds. It might be when they're killing somebody. That's it. The film never takes their perspective. That's the point. So it makes them even more one-dimensional. But I understand it, but it didn't help overall. I like how the contrast of time past and time present is a key theme of the film, even with little moments like Manny being baffled by the new technology of the present, wiretaps or forensics or whatever. Tools of gangster hunters, not tools of ex-rangers and gunfighters who took down outlaw gangs, right? So I like that contrast. I think it only added the story, it aided the story overall, but it didn't, it didn't hurt it in any way. But I enjoyed the action in the film, but I thought there should have been more action in the film. Sometimes it got a little slow, right? Pacing-wise, it got a little slow. And then the climax itself isn't super, so it kind of tampered off at the end. The headline of this movie is The Hunt for Bonnie and Clyde. There should be more of an explosiveness to the film overall, to tone of it, which I thought was kind of lacking from the first half overall, and then kind of picked up in the second half, but then tapered off at the end. So, yeah. I enjoyed watching Frank and Manny come into these modern day investigations and handle it their old school way and get the job done. That was, again, playing with that contrast. They show up the new school cats with their fancy forensics and tech and whatever, and they do it all with just basic investigation. And that was a good little scene. Underneath it all, the message, this idea of what makes someone bad or good and how that line is kind of thin is perhaps why the movie was good. Because what really makes Frank and what he did much different from what Clyde is doing, right? Because that's kind of something they play with. Frank had to cross a line a lot in his career. And so what exactly makes somebody good or bad is a question of this overall, is a question of this film. But again, I think it doesn't work because of how little time we spend with actually relating to Clyde. If we could relate to Clyde, then that really would have came across better. Performance-wise, though, Kevin Costner, Woody Harrelson, they just make the movie better. Their performances are good. I like the character tweaks in the writing for our antagonists. Maybe it would have been great. I think Bonnie and Clyde, when we do get those moments to try and show the divisiveness, it's only when we see how they're perceived by other people, like Clyde's father, or like people who are fans, or people who support them, like the gas station guy, or whatever it is. That's it. That's when we get those moments of trying to relate to Bonnie and Clyde. And again, it doesn't work enough because we don't spend legitimate time with the characters. Just seeing the terrible things they've done expresses the truth of what they really were. So in the end, that was the point. But you could have done that while also trying to add depth to them as characters overall, I think. You could argue it. Maybe the way they did it was good, like the way to do it. I just thought maybe more of a presence. I think, though, they are a presence. Obviously, they're a presence in general without actually seeing them a lot. That's the point. Maybe. Yeah. So overall, I give it a 7.8 out of 10. It was good. The fact that it wasn't a typical action-packed ride, and actually more of a well-thought-out, put-together little story might actually be why it was good. You know, if it was just some action, blah, 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 shoot 'em up thing, maybe it wouldn't have been as good. What's more is, in truth, the defeat of Bonnie and Clyde also saved the Texas Rangers. I like that fact at the end of the film. Their reconstitution was possible because of Frank and Manny. Right? The Texas Rangers were not a thing at this point in the movie, and then because of their takedown of Bonnie and Clyde, the Texas Rangers were brought back. Again, true stories are always going to be good, at least for the most part, I think, as long as they're executed properly.